Hello everyone. I want to talk today about what I call Sony's Retraction. They announced they were going to close all 3 legacy stores, and then just over 2 weeks later they made a retraction and said, no, we made a mistake, terribly sorry, we're keeping the PS3 and Vita store open after all, and only the PSP store will be closed, because that has truly run its course. Well, of course there was a lot of rejoicing in those gaming communities that are still interested in those 2 legacy platforms. There was of course an outpouring of comments, analysis, etc. on every website, many YouTube channels. Some people spoke good sense, and others were maybe just grinding an axe or coming up with some exotic theory completely unsupported. I've obviously been thinking about this quite a lot, and I have come to certain conclusions. We obviously don't know all of it, nor do we know what the future will bring, but we can look at the facts and the evidence we have, and from that we can extrapolate a little bit ahead so that we are prepared for what will eventually, inevitably happen. So Sony used the important phrase for the foreseeable future. That is the important thing. It's a very vague phrase that conveniently lets them off the hook, and we have to sort of interpret it. I saw a few people on YouTube and elsewhere using the phrase indefinitely, that the stores will be kept open indefinitely. Well, that is definitely not what Jim Ryan, the CEO of Sony, wrote in his message on the PlayStation blog. So let's stick to what we do have in writing, and the foreseeable future presumably means that the stores, once they get really old, will eventually at some point be shut down, but not right now. That's the important thing, and not in a rush. We will have time, and that is a good thing. Now, before I go into my own thoughts, I just want to comment on some of the more outrageous ideas that were being put about, like the whole operation from start to finish was a publicity stunt by Sony. Well, I don't believe in my wildest dreams that anybody at Sony would come up with such a daft publicity scheme. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever if you think about it rationally. I'm convinced that the executive echelons at Sony did want to close down the legacy stores, and they probably still do, but they ran into such presumably unexpected opposition, so much negative feedback and backlash, that it possibly, just possibly, took them by surprise. I'm not sure why they would be surprised, because honestly anybody could have read that in the tea leaves, especially the recent growing interest in preservation of classic video games. Don't they hire any expensive consultants at Sony to keep them au fait, to let them know what the current zeitgeist is? Maybe not. I think they should do that. The idea that this was just a stunt so that Sony could quickly cash in on the last few desperate panic purchases on the PS3 and Vita store just don't make any sense. If you look at the money they are literally printing through selling expensive AAA games for the PS4 and PS5, even rushed panic buying on the legacy stores would have been a drip in the ocean. No, it simply doesn't add up. I was wondering today whether the people at Sony, the decision makers, maybe they thought that the Vita's gone, we lost that battle, we lost the war over piracy and hacking, nobody will want to buy any more Vita games. And they thought that there was probably only 1% of people left who would want to use the store. I don't know, but it's a thought, because they've been so obsessed with this whole hacking and piracy thing right from the start, when the PS Vita came out, that maybe they thought nobody would care if the Vita store went down, because we're all using pirated games, apparently. Well, I reckon they noticed that there is still a sizable population out there who are Vita owners and do like to acquire their games via a legal purchase, as long as it's available. Now I come back to the foreseeable future. If we look a bit at history, it should give us an idea, I think, and I'm just consulting my notes here on my phone. The PSP is the obvious one to look at, because that store is definitely closing down at the beginning of July. The PSP has been around for 15, almost 16 years in the West. The shipments of the PlayStation Portable ended in 2014 worldwide, and the PSP sold approximately 80 million units in its 10-year lifetime, and was considered overall a success, that sales figure. So the store is only being dismantled, and I believe there's only a skeleton store left anyway, after nearly 16 years, 15 to 16 years. So that gives us a time frame, but we have to bear in mind that the PSP was much more successful in terms of unit sales than the Vita. Although the Vita does have one aspect in its favour, and that is the very high attachment rate, and that is industry speak for how many software units, i.e. games, are attached to one Vita unit. And the figure I saw in the statistics is one of the highest in the industry with the Vita. It's about 10 to 1, so for one Vita, roughly 10 software items. There are a few consoles, usually in the classic era, who had a higher attachment rate, but the Vita certainly ranks very highly in that respect, so that's something to take into consideration. But the Vita, of course, is only 9 years old, so it hasn't reached the age of the PSP. Most people said, it's not even 10 years old, why close the store? And I think that's right. So looking at the PSP with 15 years, I would say, and the Vita having sold fewer units and having had a very rough ride along the way, I'm thinking they might give it another couple of years. If we're really lucky, possibly 3. It would have reached 12 years life cycle by then. I'm sort of expecting that kind of extension. We do know one thing, that it's keeping a server going is one thing. It is not too expensive and difficult these days, and that's due to technology. But keeping a mercantile store open and running, there are a lot of costs and also fiddly processes associated with that. And clearly Sony wanted to step away from that and have those resources to use somewhere else. So if the store doesn't do well at all, let's say over the next year, I would say we might be looking at the chopping block yet again. You know, if there's only 3 people buying one game each on the store over the next 6 months, it just doesn't make any sense. But I actually would expect that there will be purchases and enough to keep it afloat, because we have seen quite an influx of people into the Vita community over the last year or so who are only just picking up a second-hand Vita and want to get into the Vita games and the Vita lifestyle. Who wouldn't? I don't know. So how many units did the Vita sell in its lifetime, because production has obviously ended? The figure we've had until now, and that was always a guesstimate because Sony has never revealed official figures, that number has been 15 to 16 million. Recently there was an ex-Sony employee who held a question and answer session on Reddit, on the PS Vita subreddit. I noticed that he mentioned the figure of 17 million. However, that doesn't make any difference really to the fate of the Vita, because a million here or there, you know, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of what happened. Compare that with the sales of the 3DS, which was a direct competitor. Nintendo had trouble getting that one out of the blocks, but they stuck with it, and it did pretty well during its lifetime. 75 million units sold is pretty respectable. But yeah, the Vita with 15, 16 or 17 million, whichever one you pick, it was just never gonna cut it really. So the stores are operational. That still leaves us with a lot of questions. We don't know, will there be any new games published digitally via the Vita store? Because remember, there was a cut-off date, developers were scrambling to meet it, many fell by the wayside because they were just not given enough time to finish their project and bring it to the store. So we thought the last games we'd be getting were Astro Aqua Kitty and this week Scourgebringer. Will Sony open up the gates again to allow developers to submit their games for inclusion on the Vita store? Will they then actually put up the notice, new games or latest games, you know, the rubric there on the main Vita store page, and actually announce that there's a new game there? I mean, that would be fantastic. Of course, sadly, with the announcement that the store was closing, many developers pulled their resources off any last Vita project they had, and obviously already allocated those resources to some new project. It may not make sense for them to now suddenly reverse and go back. I understand that those are, you know, practical and difficult considerations, and we may have lost a few potential Vita games by the wayside just through this silly announcement and then retraction by Sony. It really, you don't do that to any market. The one thing markets don't like is insecurity, not knowing what's happening. It's not good business practice. And people who think that Sony have regained all the positive PR feedback that they lost initially, that people are now saying, oh, Sony is so wonderful, and no, I don't think so. I think we've all been polite and said, thank you very much, Sony, we do appreciate it, but the whole thing has left a bad taste in my mouth and a feeling of loss of confidence in Sony's services, and that extends to other things as well. I'll come to that in a moment. So, will there be new games? We don't know yet. hopefully the developer community, once they get information and the green light, will let us know. I don't think Sony will. What about PSP games, the ones that, you know, were also on the PSP Store? I'm assuming that they're simply closing down the PSP Store as a merchant operation, but the PSP games that are currently listed both on the PS3 Store and on the Vita Store, there is really no reason to pull them at all, because they are playable on the Vita. That's why they are on those stores, and can be downloaded via the PS3 as well. So I'm not expecting them to suddenly pull PSP games off the store. That would be very strange and completely counterproductive, I think. Now, another issue I am very concerned about is store maintenance. If you've been a Vita owner for a number of years or since the very beginning, you will know that from about 2015-2016 onwards, Sony let the store slide really badly. We've put up with abysmal performance, constant errors, sometimes not being able to download games, then the search function didn't work. It was a never-ending litany of problems. It did not inspire confidence. It made us all think that Sony somehow wanted to play whack-a-mole with the PS Vita store. Likewise, I have problems over the maintenance of the PS3 store. That is very, very much aging. It runs like molasses. I frequently get crashes on my two PS3s, so it's not just one PS3 that's, you know, mysteriously afflicted by this. No, both of them show the same symptom. And it usually happens when the store either gets busy or suddenly it starts chugging and I can't use the search function anymore, and everything slows down, and then suddenly, boom. And I'll just show you the screen I then get, which pretends that I switched off the PS3, but I didn't. I simply tried to use the store, and you then have to go through the whole restarting, rebuilding the database bit. It's just not funny. It would be nice if they could just beef that up a little bit. Likewise, just keep the store entries, you know, up to date and accurate. It's not asking too much, I think. Likewise, I am afraid I have had a pretty serious issue on the PS Vita store, where I recently bought a game that is available as cross-buy on the Vita, on the PS3 and on the PS4. A very old game, one of the early ones, a classic game called Ollie Ollie, the famous skateboarding game. And I purchased it deliberately using the Vita store. Went through fine. I downloaded it straight away. And then a day later, I happened to be looking at my download list on the Vita store, and I saw this. Now, the game is correctly available on my PS3 download list and on my PS4, but on the Vita I cannot download it via the download list, but I can go to the store, look up the game, and there the little button says download. Now, how crazy is that? So if they had closed down the store, as they said they would, I would have been left with a game that I should have been able to access via the download list, but couldn't because of some unexplained, mysterious error that escapes me. So this thing is not bulletproof, and Sony could be letting themselves in for a world of trouble if they close down a store, promise people they can download the games via the download list, and then that function is not working correctly. So I would encourage everyone who has precious games which you don't have installed at the moment on your Vita, but you think they're safely in your download list, just go and check that they are there on the list and it says that you can download them. If it says cannot download via this system, then there is a problem. Now, one other interesting question that arose is, will they reinstate sales and discounts? Especially on the Vita, we know that Sony disabled the ability for developers via their admin panel to put in a request for having something included in a sale or to have it discounted. That option is virtually gone, or has been gone for some time, which is why we haven't had any sales on the Vita. I can't remember what the situation is on the PS3. I occasionally come across a game and I see it's been discounted, but there isn't much available for sale on the PS3 Store, and there certainly aren't any reliable sales listings I can see, so you would have to hunt around literally. So it would be nice if they just, had a big sale of PS3 games and Vita games, maybe at Christmas time or whatever. What would be nice. Can't be that difficult to do. If they did that, it would show us that they were actually serious about wanting to attract buyers to the store. Let me just recap my thoughts about this whole situation that I can only describe as a Sony fiasco, because I think that's what it was. By a whisker, they turned it around, and very quickly, because they could see the danger signals. So that was a smart move, but the clock was ticking, So we're basically talking damage control. Some people have tried to read into this that this shows Sony will have change of thought on the issue of game preservation and keeping classic games available for the future. I have to say I don't see that. I wish it was the case. I wish it with all my heart, but I work according to the evidence-based model, which means I look at all the facts and evidence in front of me and then draw my conclusions from that. I don't go into speculation that is simply cannot be supported by what we know. So far, I haven't seen any evidence that Sony is serious about wanting to preserve especially older video games. But we will be having that same conversation in a few years down the track about PS4 games and PS5 games, I am sure. That issue is not going away, but Sony is pretty silent on the topic. They made their decision when they designed the PS5 to have it only backward compatible with PS4 games. They made their bed and they have to lie in it now. What the future holds, we obviously don't know. All I can ask is, Suikoden, anyone? Do we really want to see a classic game like that completely disappear? I don't think so. This has nothing to do with the store closures, but just as a final point, I want to mention the dreaded CMOS battery issue, or as it's called, the C-bomb, because when the battery dies, you may have problems playing your games. Once again, we have not had much comment from Sony on this. I'm pretty sure they're looking into it and scratching their heads and wondering what to do about it. Could be another issue that blows up in their face, who is to know? There was one YouTube channel, a very, very big one of the few big ones I do keep an eye on, called Spawn Wave, and he showed us a case of a customer who asked support about the CMOS issue and received a reply that they are looking into it, which is probably just the usual copy and paste type of support reply, but that's all we have to go on at the moment. I would say they're aware of it and they will have to make up their minds pretty soon as to what to do, especially with the PS3 being a legacy. Do they really want to deny people access to their physical and digital games once the CMOS battery dies and cause problems? I really think it's not a good look to do that, not at all. That was my thoughts for today on what has been a roller coaster ride of 3 weeks now. I'm happy we've got a window of relief that we can go on buying games when we want to without being rushed into a panic. Hopefully this will also mean that prices for physical games will at least stabilize a bit. We've seen some very crazy stuff going on there with certain games, both Vita and PS3, but only time will tell. I leave you with those thoughts. I'm happy to discuss these issues, as we always do, calmly and rationally in our weekly chats. I hope you found some of this interesting. As always, please keep well. I'm Food for Dogs. Bye bye.